I have a question. As an as a trained and educated intersectional feminist and that ideology, what was your view on what happened to Kavanaugh and the movement of Believe All Women? What would you say to that?
Well, again, like I think it's really complicated because I don't actually know the specific Kavanaugh reference that you're talking about, but there are lots of, I can imagine what it would be. And there are lots of examples of that in Canada, right? Where Me Too kind of came to the forefront, accusations were made, people lost their jobs. I think with Me Too, it's very, very different when you have somebody in the public eye who has a lot of power culturally, has a lot of money, and there are, tons of people saying that this person has seriously hurt them. I think that is very, very different than like one person versus another person, where those people are, sort of roughly equal in the scheme of power in the world. I don't think that there's really like a good answer for it because, like I said, if you go through the court system, the burden of proof is incredibly high and the process is very traumatizing. But when we do the flip side of that, where we try to make consequences in community, people have killed people because of accusations or because of things that they have done. They've taken justice into their own hands and felt that was what the right thing to do was. I just kind of reached a point in my life where I don't really know. I don't pretend to know like the answers to these things anymore.
Yeah, that's really insightful of you. I really appreciate that. It is complicated and it's not easy. So can you tell us what it's like when, I don't know if that's the right word, but the mob comes after you, or you just get hit out of left field by, you said, 100 people were just saying stuff about you?
It was like hundreds of people.
And it was just like a big pile on. Like what causes that on a like what happened? I'm not familiar with that. I've never experienced, I've heard about it, but psychologically, what's going on within the ethos of the group and why do people feel free to do that? And it must be horrible. Like, what's that like?
I think that, I think, my friends like Molly and Jay and Clementine, and it's like, we've definitely talked about this stuff in a lot of detail, both in our public work and like personally, like amongst us. And I think a really big part of the issue is that we live in a capitalist system where we have billionaires who, it's maybe sort of to certain crowds of people, it may seem extreme to say this, but the billionaires are like a parasite class, right? Like they just are taking and taking and taking and taking as much resources and power, money as they can possibly hoard. And then you have everybody else, regular people who are just living, and we have a difficult time, like even me as a person who has that middle-class safety net, and as a person who will eventually have inherited wealth, which is like sort of regular middle-class inherited wealth, my parents' style, inherit some money, it would still be difficult for me to do things like enter the real estate market, right? Like, and because I can't enter the real estate market, that means that I've had habitually unstable housing. So when the average person has poor access to housing, poor mental health, poor social outcomes, because we're working all the time to pay for housing that we don't have any security in, we really get the crabs in a bucket thing, right? Where it's like you put all the crabs in the bucket and one crab tries to get out, all the other crabs yank it back down into the bucket. And so I think
jealousy and envy are part of what's going on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Jealousy and envy are a part of what's going on. It's people believing like you don't deserve your success. I think the other thing that also happened too with what I was doing was that, now it's very common to be on the internet, to build a following, and then to launch a workshop, to have a newsletter, to have built this sort of online business life. In 2018, none of my peers were doing that. Like none of my peers were running an online business. And like, I was taking classes and learning how to do this stuff. And so I was just taking sort of like really basic understandings of marketing and building an online business and taking these from, people who are slightly more normie, as you might say, and having some success. And I think now it's become more normal, and you still will see people getting attacked for it. But it's not as kind of unusual to see that kind of success. I think that people, I think it's a normal human thing. Like even amongst my sort of social group, the people in my world which is almost everyone at this point of my friends who are online, like all of them have built bigger followings than me. Many of them have published books, have found great success at what they do. And I think for the most part, I'm generally able to be happy for them, to give them money to support what they do, to really love that they're out there doing it. But there are definitely moments where it's like, I feel not great about the fact that I don't know if that success will ever come for me. And also that like people literally will keep like notes or Excel sheets about different things that people have done wrong so that they can cancel them really well later. It's a terrifying way to live. And it chips away at your sense of identity, your sense of self-worth, but also in your sense of hope. And that's definitely happened to me. But yeah, it's a difficult thing to have experienced. And even now being friends with people who aren't in that world as much, like it's very, very hard to explain to anybody new coming into my life, like how this stuff has impacted me, because it's very, very hard to understand if you haven't experienced it yourself.
So there was pressure by the group, and then everybody in the group felt pressure to cancel you and cut you out of their lives. So you lost your business, you lost your blog, your workshops, your friendships, your partners together for social justice. It was like you were left all alone. Is that a fair characterization of what happened?
Yes. I would also say though that, I mean, it's hard. I'm debating like sort of how to express this out loud, but you know, I also gave up. Like I see people in my life who didn't do that. And I think that there's pros and cons to having had given up. I think the most sort of important piece about giving up is that I also don't feel like I really had much of a real shot at doing anything differently. You know, at the time I was living in the woods and I was really just focusing on very basic survival. Like it was very like chop wood, carry water, try not to get hypothermia. I lost a massive amount of weight because I was so cold all the time. I was suicidal for many, many, many months, quite seriously. And it was very difficult to be around me. And yeah, I think that now it's happened to such a degree that people have observed it. Either it's happened to them or it's happened to someone that they love, or it's happened in front of them so many times that they're starting to see the formula. They're starting to see, because it's a very formulaic way of speaking about people, right? And there's a meme account called 𝗓𝗓 Cancellations that does a very good job of like showing what this formula looks like. But yeah, it's terrible. It's a terrible thing to have had experienced. And I'm very, very lucky that I think I managed to find hope in other ways. But also I managed to just choose to keep living anyways, which I think it's very, very difficult when you have people who what they want at their core is to destroy you. They want, like, they would be happy if you killed yourself, you know? And it's a hard thing to have a lot of people feel that way about you. I don't wish it on anybody. I don't wish it on my worst enemy. It was very, very difficult. And I really had to ask myself, because after I got canceled, I was like, am I a feminist? I don't really know. I don't really know what my political beliefs are. And what I ended up asking myself in the end was, what is my role in the village? Like, I live in a literal village, and what is my role in this village? And being able to figure out the answers to that question allowed me to take steps into becoming the person that I am now, which is in a lot of ways the same person, just without all the woke bullshit. But also it's more distilled. I have a more clear sense of myself than I ever did before, because
that sounds incredibly healthy.
Yeah, I would say so.
I'm sorry, you were saying there was a connection. I kind of cut you off.
Well, all I was going to say is that it's more distilled because there's not as much noise.
Not as much noise. Yes.